and good day, as they say down under, right? Good day. For me, it's good morning. For you, it might be good afternoon or good evening. And welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is October 3rd, 2024, and we have a very special speaker with us today, Prabha Sankaranarayan. Am I close? I'm so sorry.
Sankaranarayan.
There you go. So Prabha, we're so happy to have her with us today, who's going to speak to us about Beyond Binaries, the role of mediators and peace builders in building social cohesion. You know, we're all peacemakers as mediators, as people in the world. We try and end conflict in so many ways, whether you're a practicing attorney as an advocate, whether you're a parent, whether you're a human being. There's always conflict that needs peace making. And so we're all part of that. And it will be our pleasure today to hear more about that. But as you know, these programs, there is no charge for these programs. They're held every week, and they have been since the spring of 2020, when Natalie Armstrong-Lotan, at the start of the pandemic, decided there had to be more. There had to be something that could give back. And so hence this started and has evolved into what we know and love with affection as Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Every week, and we have been since the spring of 2020, every week we bring another fascinating, amazing colleague, another amazing speaker to this group. And all we ask is that if you're able, you make a donation in any amount to either the food bank that the speaker recommends or food bank of your choice. And then if you would be so kind as to let us know, because we don't handle any money. And Natalie keeps a running total of what people have told her that they've donated. And hence, then we have an idea of all the good in the world that this program is making and generating food for the hungry. And there is so much hunger in this world. Natalie, do you want to tell us at this point what our number is of what people have told us has been donated?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jean. Thanks to Prabha. You both do amazing work in this industry. So to date, I've been told about $621,235.32 in donations from our colleagues around the world. Thank you all so much for your generosity.
Absolutely. I can see $1 million in our near future. You know, how soon, who knows, but we'll keep it going. So thank you all so much. And without further ado, let's get to Prabha. Prabha is the president and CEO, one of the founders of Mediators Beyond Borders International. It's an international impact organization whose mission is to build local skills for peace and to promote mediation worldwide. She's committed to partnership, as evidenced by the collaborations with organizations globally. She's a conflict transformation practitioner who has mediated, facilitated, and trained in Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. Essentially, she's a citizen of the world. She is known for her skill set and as a capacity or in her capacity as CEO of Mediators Beyond Borders International. She also designs conflict transformation and capacity building programs around the world, serves as a consultant for companies, policymakers, governments, universities, any group engaged in civil resistance, or as an advisor also on women in peace and security. She has an amazing resume. You can see and learn more about her at the Will Work for Food website, willworkforfood.news, and certainly at mediatorsbeyondborders.org, which is the website for Mediators Beyond Borders International. It is indeed our honor today and our pleasure to welcome Prabha. And so, Prabha, the floor is yours. Maybe you can tell us something about the two different food banks that you suggested, and then take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Natalie, for starting this amazing program, which I learned about a couple of years ago. And I am really happy to spend this next hour with you and really honored that you, all of you, have chosen to spend this hour with us. So thank you for joining us. I was born and raised in India, and I have spent most of my adult life in the United States. The two food pantries, the first one is in Bangalore. And if you see the link, please know, because I know this is generally a global audience, that the food pantry in Bangalore, fortunately or unfortunately, can only take donations from those in India. And the second food pantry is the one in Pittsburgh, my current hometown. It is an amazing place that has a really extraordinary bank of volunteers. My friends serve at the food bank, and they do some extraordinarily innovative things. And so I would be honored if you would make your donations in either one of those. And if you, like me, feel a connection to your hometown, please also feel free. It begins at home, right? So to make it your own hometown, that's all right too. So with that, I have to say that I thought about several titles for this, just given the times that we are living in. And moving beyond binaries to complexification, community, and connection kept coming back to mind, partly because I like alliteration, and partly because those seem like the very underpinnings of what we need in our communities today. I want to begin with an acknowledgement of what's happening around us and take a moment to recognize what an emotional time it is now. Probably for everyone in this room in one way, shape, or form, for one reason or another. We are living through a particularly challenging time, and it may be true that every generation before us has said it, but there is something that is uniquely 21st century because of the combination of factors that contribute to the experiences that we are all having at this moment. So while we live and work in countries around the world, these issues of violence and loss, of forgiveness and the possibility of reconciliation are so very hard when we are living through this moment in history, when there is so much pain, so much division. And what comes across often as paralysis to solve some of the existential problems we face today. It does not seem adequate. So how do we confront these dynamics? And how do we think about the role that we as mediators might play in creating stronger, more resilient relationships at all levels, wherever you're working? I want to begin with just a short video about Mediators Beyond Borders, partly because it is a community that has inspired me for the last 17 years, 16 years. And it is the home from which I do a lot of my peace building work over these last few years. And so I want to share just a little bit about the organization, and it will not take very long. So as the first time I am using this platform today, give me a little grace and I will play the video. Here we go. I have to remember to share sound. I know that, so please indicate, Jean.
Conflict has become too common all over the world.
Can you hear the sound, Jean? Thank you.
How can we prepare communities to live together and accept people's differences peacefully? At Mediators Beyond Borders International, We build local skills for peace building and promote mediation worldwide. We create the soil for peaceful cohabitation, to prevent and resolve violent conflict, to bring healing and reconciliation, to equip local peace builders and change makers all around the world. We do this through different creative methods: problem solving, creating meaningful connections, nonviolent communication, restorative circles, negotiation, collaboration, mediation, working with local grassroots organizations, creating connections, a sense of community and trust to change the current violent narratives globally. We have achieved a lot. Leaders' lives were saved. Combatants were safely reintegrated into their village. Women prevented violence at elections in their countries. Students were trained to be peacemakers. Doctors saw better health outcomes for children. But we have so much more to achieve. Anyone can be a peace builder. Your commitment, dedication, and investment makes the difference. Become a part of an international network of peace builders from over 120 countries, taking action to build a more peaceful world.
I am reminded when I watch this, many of those are photographs of people in the Mediators Beyond Borders community, and some of them are no longer with us. So I want to take a moment to honor all of those who have contributed to the work of this community, and to all of you who continue to do this work of peace building around the world. So, can you all see that? Great. When I speak about mediators in a political context, or at any presentation, actually, I'm sorry, one of the things I am very mindful of is that we often talk about politics as if it is separate from our daily lives. And so I have a proposition to make, which is that whether you care about politics or not, politics cares about you and is interested in you. And this is not my quote. Just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean that politics doesn't take an interest in you, is what the Greek statesman Pericles said 2,500 years ago. And right now, what I would say is that politics is taking an interest in us. And there is a lot at stake. There is a lot at stake today, and lots of reasons for us to think about, what do we bring? What do we bring as people who describe ourselves as problem solvers, as people who facilitate collaboration, who facilitate joint problem solving, consensus building? All of these processes that you all facilitate, I propose, are the underpinnings of a healthy democracy. And you might do this in lots of different ways, in lots of different contexts. And so this is actually as much a plea as it is a presentation. My plea to you is to step forward at this time, to step into the heat, to step into those spaces that you all have the skills to hold and contain and forge into something better. So that is my plea to you, and I'm asking you to listen to what I share in the next few minutes as background for it and as support for it. And I invite you to challenge anything I say at any point. So could you share in the chat if you will, just the countries you are in. So I'm mindful of some of the dynamics that you might be experiencing. While I'm focusing on what's happening globally and using as an example something that we are doing in the United States, I am very curious about where you are all from. I see India and the US, France, okay, Greece, Canada, okay, Nigeria, great. Some wonderful work that is happening there. And the South, somebody feels the distinction of the US and the South as necessary to make. Thank you, Melissa. Great. Different parts of the United States. Okay, so I don't feel terrible about having used an example from here, about using an example from here for a couple of different reasons. One, I think it is a robust example of the role that you as mediators, facilitators, and problem solvers can play. And one that I think is significant, just given the times we are living in and the experiences we are having in the oldest democracy in the world. Somebody challenged me about being the oldest democracy. Maybe I should add in modern times. And I begin often by saying that I come from the largest democracy, the largest one in the world. Whoops, I'm so sorry. I need to get rid of this. To what is the oldest one in the world. And like everything, like all of you, bring with me experiences that shaped my own life. And amongst those are growing up in post-independence India. So what you see is my grandfather, that is his permit to be a witness to the Constituent Assembly's signing of the Declaration of Independence. And what I have is a letter that he wrote. He was a part of the Quit India movement. He was a secretary of the Indian National Congress and was one of 6 journalists who was witness to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I grew up listening to his stories. I grew up listening to his exhortations to question everything and everyone. And this is despite growing up in a culture where respecting your elders is valued greatly. So what I learned from him were the values of fighting for independence and what it takes, what kinds of actions it takes, and questioning authority and being a critical thinker, as a lifelong critical thinker. Those roots come from my experiences with my grandfather. And I'm thinking about that now as I am looking at the work that all of us are doing in this country during these times. And when I talk about the extraordinary times that we live in, what I am referring to are the multiplicity of global trends that affect our lives in every way, in large and small influences, impacts. I know that the impact of the pandemic has been widespread globally, but if you think of that as being embedded in the context of the growing concentration of wealth in the hands of few, of the rising tides in migration, the global migration of populations, which is at an all-time high. And these are migrations of populations as a result of a variety of factors, climate change being one of them, violent conflict being another, political disruptions and instability being others. And the last is the resurgent authoritarianism and the trends in the decline of democracy globally. all you have to do is look at Freedom House's recent reports to look at how these shifts are happening. You know, until a few years ago, I was talking about the decline of violence globally. What is true is that until a few years ago, what we were witnessing was a global decline of international violence. And that seems like a strange thing to say today, as we are reading the headlines about what is happening around the world, in countries around the world. So the resurgent authoritarianism, along with the decline of democracy, is a global trend, and it is one that we can spend some time talking about a little bit later if necessary, if you're interested. But what I really want to focus on now is that there are many terms that are used for these trends coming together at this time. People refer to it as a polycrisis. People refer to it as the nexus of multiple factors. The reality is it leaves us all feeling its impact in a variety of ways. And if you're like me, it's not helpful to feel helpless. The response that we often have to threat is one of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You all are maybe familiar with the neurobiology of threat. And the reason I bring that up is because our brains are wired to treat these social and relational needs in the same way as survival. And so what it activates is a primary rewards and threat circuitry, whether it is real or not. So as you all have studied, if you're familiar with the neurobiology of conflict, what you know is that our responses to conflict are influenced by a variety of factors. And at the same time, what happens when our identity, when our physical self, when our values, when all of these factors are threatened, what is activated is a fairly hardwired response to these factors. And what does all of that contribute to? What I'm leading up to is the increasing polarization in populations within the United States as well as within countries globally. So if we're looking at what's going on nationally in the United States, you can find a lot of this. I'll be happy to share some of where this comes from, is this perceived sense of fear as well as personal pain. Most people are tired of the political division, notwithstanding what the media tells us about what's going on. Most Americans, majority of Americans, are tired of the divisions in this country. As you can see, a significant percentage talk about political polarization as a threat to this republic. People are exhausted by it, and the term the exhausted majority is one that gets used often. And people are very concerned about the divisions contributing to political violence. However, and there are a lot more of these statistics that you can look at, in this context, what is also happening is that, for the most part, we don't know the people that we claim to hate. Most Americans have few or no friends from the other side, however you might describe the other side. People say they have avoided talking about politics with someone whose views they know are opposed. And more than half this country now lives in places where, as you can see, they're landslide counties. So what we are finding ourselves living in is a time that is layered with multiple catastrophic events in communities where, for the most part, we know few people who might disagree with us or see themselves on a different side of any particular issue, and unfamiliar with them without real contact for the most part. Again, these are national statistics. At the same time, what is wonderful is that there is this desire and hope for change. And like all of you who showed up today to hear about what is present beyond binaries, 79% of people say that they would play a part in reducing social division in this country. That they would do, that it is important to reduce the divisiveness in this country, and that it is possible. So I leave at that point with this thought that there is tremendous room for impact if you choose to, given that notwithstanding our divisiveness, notwithstanding the personal pain that people might experience, because everything from families no longer gathering to not being able to talk to your neighbors. I'll tell you, I walk with my neighbors, and it was just a couple of months ago, I found people whispering, and it was about my book club. And they couldn't talk loudly about it. And I said, what's the deal? Oh, we are talking about hillbilly elegy. And so the concern, when I said, why are you whispering about it? Well, I don't want to offend anyone. So we live in the oldest democracy in the world and cannot talk about our leadership because we are afraid of offending some. And I thought, what if you were able to have a conversation in which you had the skills to engage with curiosity? What if you had the skills to listen deeply? What if you had the skills to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to take another's perspective? Well, Prabha, when you come to these meetings, they're much better than when you're not there. I don't know how many of you have had these experiences, but that's what I kept hearing. And so what we decided to do was actually, it was really funny. We said, we can do this. We can start in our own neighborhoods because, to put it very bluntly, on November 7th or 8th or 9th, when we know the results of our elections, we will still be neighbors. We will still be going to the same book clubs. Our children will go to school together. We will be walking our dogs together in our neighborhood. How are we going to do that if we cannot talk about the most important events that affect our lives? So what we started was a democracy club in my neighborhood, where we made a commitment to do what I will tell you people are doing nationally. So as you saw some of the statistics that I shared about where people are in this country, what I also know is that there is a tremendous desire and hope for change. And because it is possible, and because it's possible with a group of people like you who have the skills to facilitate the kinds of conversations that I'm referring to, we have now seen in this country an explosion. I don't know how many of you are aware of all of the groups that have emerged in the US landscape. And this is just a very, very small smattering of them. Each one of these is actually a network. What started to happen about 6 years ago was an increasing focus on attention in the United States to the growing toxic polarization, not just polarization, but the toxic polarization of conversation and ideology in this country. And many leaders of organizations many leaders of international organizations started turning to the United States to say, I need to do something in my own country. Out of those came many of these organizations. You will recognize some of them, and if you don't, I'm happy to share more information. The reason I'm sharing this is that there is a growing ecosystem of mediators, facilitators, peace builders, social cohesion builders who have gathered, who are collecting across this country and saying, join us, because we need your skills. What we want to create as a democracy here needs your skills. We can no longer think that we can build peace in this community, in this country, or in any other by using 20th century problems are prehistoric ones. And what do I mean by that? If we think about politics as a problem-solving mechanism, as one that requires consensus, as a societal consensus-building mechanism, does it make your ability to participate any easier than if you think of it as a partisan political issue that I cannot stay neutral about? Because my challenge to you would be, how neutral are you willing to stay about the form of governance we have in this country? Or do you have a position about democracy itself? And if you do, what we know from our work around the world at Mediators Beyond Borders is that we cannot solve these problems without the capacity for people to come together at the local level, at the regional level, and at the national level. So for example, the kinds of things that we are seeing are what's happening at school boards, what's happening in your municipal elections, what is happening with neighborhoods, problem solving challenges. So the challenges that we are facing are at every level, and elections are one tool in a democracy. You know, people, when we work in countries around the world, people at the end of civil wars, at the end of violent conflict, are quick to jump to elections as one of the major tools of a democracy. And I agree that it is. But if we cannot build social cohesion, democracies will not survive. What I think we need to understand is that as a problem-solving process, we know something about the ways in which all of these issues can be addressed in a variety of contexts. Now, some of you might be commercial mediators, some of you might be family mediators, some of you might be international peace builders. What undergirds a lot of what we do are a shared skill set. And those are ones I think of as extraordinarily important for social cohesion. Building social cohesion supports democracy. Democracies by themselves don't somehow promote social cohesion. So what I want to do is think about this conversation about not being partisan and not being political as one of skills. When you have the skills to have a conversation in which you can hold space, you can be curious, and you can see multiple perspectives and facilitate joint problem solving and consensus building, it becomes a problem solving process. And this is something that those of you who are familiar with Ken's work in the world of mediation and democracy might hear him speak about also. He talks about politics as a problem solving process. And I really do think that this is, again, our time to step forward into these spaces because they are large and small. They're in the workplace. You know, I was at a mayor's conference a couple of months ago. So mayors from around the United States gathered in the Strong Cities network. And one of the things that came through loudly in that conversation was that as a mayor, I am no longer addressing potholes and snow or water supply. I am addressing global issues. What they were talking about was that what happens in other parts of the world affects my job as the mayor of Hoboken, the mayor of Pittsburgh, the mayor of Louisville, the mayor of Houston. Because our world is so interconnected, because our lives are interconnected, my job is not, it's no longer enough for me to just pay attention to what's happening locally. I need to understand the impact of global events on my local community. So where are we? 36. So it becomes really important to be able to think about what you're doing as having local impact and the possibility for local intervention. So I'm going to very quickly talk for the next 10 minutes Gosh, it went on far longer than I thought. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we started in the United States as mediators. And it is built on what we learned globally from our work around the world, and is just one example. So let me share very quickly the example of the trust network as a social cohesion building mechanism that was created 4 years ago, and then end with what questions you might have and discussions we might have about how we can all participate in this process. All right, let's see. Here we go. So 4 years ago, a couple of us came together at a time when we had been working together as partners and looked at what was happening nationally before the 2020 elections, and also looked at what existed as a national peace-building architecture and realized that there wasn't one. And so at that time, about 25 to 30 different organizations and networks in the United States came together to form the Trust Network. And the idea of the Trust Network was that in order to make the kinds of changes that we want to make, it is not enough for us to work with any one sector. And again, I use the word sector a little bit loosely because you can divide populations in lots of different ways. And so I'm thinking of these 4 sectors. Let me come back. Here we go. That in order to truly have the kind of transformation that we want to see and to build social cohesion and security, what we need to bring together are these 4 groups of people. And there are huge differences in how one might slice populations in the world, but here we are using structural reform actors. And by that, I mean people working on governance and democracy structures, ranked choice voting, money in politics, redistricting. These are the kinds of structural reform actors that are very active across the US landscape. And then there are the civil resistance movement actors, right? People who are working on social and racial justice, environmental justice, all of these issues, activists, as you might also refer to them. And then what the United States has is an extraordinarily robust judicial legal sector. All of those working towards constitutional reform and legal reform. And then all of us who fall in the peace building, bridge building, analysts, mapping, and interventionists, that all of these sectors need to come together in order for us to make the kind of change that we want to see happen. And that means bringing people together who have organizations together that have a wide range of skills. And one particular structure that we wanted to create was an early warning platform in order to prevent violence. But in order to create an early warning platform, what we also knew was that we needed to address the root causes of violence in communities. And that means working in partnership with community-based mediation centers and bridge building organizations in order to address these challenges. And so when you think about what this early warning platform looks like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Our partners at University of Massachusetts, as well at the National Association of Community Mediation, came together to create an early warning platform, which looks at what is happening in communities across the country. And this is, again, a tool that comes out of countries in Africa that have had highly developed early warning, early action platforms where people, civil society organizations, gather data about what's happening in their communities and feed it into a national structure, an architecture that allows us to respond locally. And I'm happy to answer some of the questions that might arise about what this could look like, how it happens, how it works in the United States at this moment in time, and come back to a summary of what an early warning process looks like which is basically, as Madhva, our expert, says, it's the right information to the right at the right time, delivering it to the right people in the right format in order for the right response. That's what an early warning platform looks like. And these are all the kinds of things that were developed as a result of mediators and peace builders coming together to work on democracy as a problem-solving process. So I come back to the proposition in the 15 minutes that we have left. Can mediators participate with all of our principles of omnipartiality and neutrality in supporting democracy in our communities and around the world? Thank you. I'm going to stop here for now and come and welcome your questions and your challenges.
Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I don't know where to begin with questions. Would anybody have questions and that they would like to ask? I know mediators beyond borders and without borders too, for that matter, but not in the official title. You know, I remember first becoming acquainted with it through Ken Cloak here in Los Angeles, and thinking of the doctors, you know, that go with beyond borders, and how wonderful that mediators can as well. So it's a unique opportunity we have to listen to Prabha talk about this and have our questions answered straight from the top. Anybody?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Okay.
You know, I as an academic, you know, I did my MA studies in Paris, and it was extremely a different perspective from what I'm used to in the United States. Quite different. You know, I'd say the US has more conservative education, and what I experienced in France was, you know, very socialist, deeply socialist. From my experience, what I've found is that the problem is created a lot of time by government entities. And then they come back and they say, oh, we have a problem, let's create a solution. So then they create a government organization that fixes the solution. So then you have more government interfering in the process. So I'm just curious, which I think is problematic from a personal point of view. So, you know, so I feel like there is this kind of, you know, snowball effect. So, you know, I just wonder, as far as your recommendations, is this more like at a private level? Is it through government funding? Is this something, you know, that you feel like, I mean, if there's a way to do it at the private level, it would be ideal. You know, I mean, just based on what I've observed. So I just wonder, you know, what is your, how is your approach, and like with the organization as far as the financing and who's involved in this?
Thank you, Jenny. Those are a great set of questions. The organization itself, I'll start with the bigger picture. The organization itself is funded by a variety of sources. And given the work that we do, we have to be very careful even about which governments we accept money from, depending on which context we are working in. So for example, given the US history with Nicaragua, when the violence broke out in Nicaragua 6 years ago, we were very mindful of keeping any activities that we are engaged in there funded in a way that did not get tangled in the politics between the two countries. Similarly, for this particular project, we started with private funding, and it's a combination of private and public funding. Now, the reason I think that an early warning system needs to be civil society based is that the US early warning system that the FBI and the police collect data about has a couple of challenges. One, given the population, the different sectors of our population and their relationship with the security sector, with the police, it is not one where people are comfortable reporting. So there's a lot of underreporting of violence, hate crimes, and bias that is reported. The second is that our data gathering is retrospective. It is not prospective or current in real time so that we can actually do something to prevent it. So it's a combination of private and public sector funding. And this structure that we are talking about as a civil infrastructure for peace and security is a civil society infrastructure. Ultimately, there are countries like Nigeria and Kenya that have departments for peace, which the US does not. The US has a US Institute for Peace, which focuses all of its activities on countries outside the United States. There is not a division for peace in the United States. Think about what that would look like. And it might take civic advocacy to create it. And that's what we're doing here, saying that if we want to build social cohesion, it will take building relationships with massive groups of people. It's a huge country, and building a network in the United States is not an easy task. There are networks and networks, fortunately. I used to say until a few years ago, well, until a couple of years ago, I would say, oh my God, is there another network? Which means that's one more thing I need to keep track of, until I realized that's a good thing. That there are more networks focused on social cohesion and democracy is extraordinarily wonderful, right? That more and more people are beginning to feel like we cannot take it for granted. I'll give you an example. 15 years ago, in my community, how many of you are familiar with the International Baccalaureate program? Anyone? Yep, I see one or two hands. So this is a program that was started in Switzerland. It was started for diplomats whose families travel around the world and were challenged by school systems around the country being very difficult to shift to. And so the International Baccalaureate program was started. It is a global organization now with schools around the world. And in my school district, there was a school board that decided that the IB program was socialist, and that we did not need anyone else telling us how to educate our children. This is despite the fact that the school board is local, right? All of the people who are on my school board that administers the $60 million in the school district are professionals in the community. Our curriculum is what we decide, aside from what is required federally. And that we needed to also at that time start with prayer in the schools and burn all the books that talked about evolution. That's what happened in my school district 15 years ago. What we realized as a community, and this is a school district that at that time had many CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers of companies, and they choose the school district because we were the only one in the state that had a kindergarten or the first grade through 12th grade IB program, which, by the way, cost the school district less than $60,000. So they said it was too expensive and that we needed to get rid of it. What we realized was that we had become complacent. We took our local governance for granted. We were not paying attention to the rise in ideologically driven leadership that no longer cared about what made the educational system as attractive as it was in this community. What that led to was a 2-year activism campaign because we tried everything. We started with offering money for the program, and then there was a lawsuit because we discovered there was a quid pro quo arrangement between the board chair and the superintendent. And then we realized that the next step we needed to take was to convert the school board to be one in which more people, in whose election more people participated. So that meant a 2-year campaign. So at a very local level, that was an example of how complacent that community had become. And it wasn't until we saw what the board wanted to do that we realized we had given power over to 9 people. Similarly, what needs to happen at the local level when it comes to the underpinnings of our democracy, people are beginning to realize can be addressed through amazing mechanisms like citizen assemblies, like collaborative budgeting, collaborative decision-making. I mean, I think of all of these are the kinds of tools that we all use every day. And no, so it is a combination, Jenny, of private and public sector funding, as well as collaboration of private organizations with elected officials. So there are examples of, the National Governors Association has a campaign led by Governor Cox from Utah, who is a Republican and a Democratic colleague of his, who are very conscious of the fact that the divisiveness in this country needs to change. So they started a Disagree Better campaign. And you can find it. If you look up Governor Cox and Disagree Better, you'll find the campaign. So there are people across this country who are really mindful and careful about the need for building social cohesion. Sorry, I took far longer than I meant to answer that.
I appreciate you answering that question. So what would you say from your experience, someone who I've understand kind of both sides of the baccalaureate versus the non-baccalaureate? I understand both sides. I mean, I was in France, right? And I was actually a teacher's assistant there. So I understand what you're talking about. So I understand both sides of the argument. But that I tend to want to keep things just because of the track record of how government tends to perpetuate itself. I like to tend to keep things at the private level. Based on your experience, what would you say helps keep it? What's effective? Like, if given this is an area that I'm very passionate about, what would you recommend to do to keep it? Like, what techniques, or to keep something like this at the private level?
So if you think about a democracy being as effective as how informed the electorate is, it means being involved. It means participating at the local level. It means engaging in a way that we might not have otherwise. So when I think about participation at the local level, what is happening now is that recognizing that civic knowledge and civic engagement has declined significantly in this country. And this time I want to be very specific. These trends are very much in the United States and not necessarily globally, and not necessarily in every country represented on this call. The decline in civic engagement, the decline in civic knowledge has led to an exciting new development, which is civic hubs forming across the country. So what's happening is groups of people are coming together to identify what it looks like to work at a problem locally. There is a group called Urban Rural Action that is working in several states, and they call themselves locally in Pennsylvania, the Uniters. So what they do is not just come together for the sake of coming together, they come together to jointly solve problems. Because what contact theory tells us is, yes, knowing and learning about each other is important, but what builds cohesion is solving a problem together. So they don't come together just to discuss what their differences are. They come together to identify a shared problem and solve it. And that's what is beginning to happen in communities across the country. They go by lots of different names. They go by democracy hubs, they go by civic hubs, but there is a national movement to form spaces at the community level. And one of the best places I would encourage you to join is your local community mediation center. If you look at the National Association for Community Mediation's website, there are 300 plus centers across this country. This is a treasure. There is no other country in the world that has such a, well, Netherlands maybe. They will contest me and say, we have more than 300 centers. But what you see as the principles of the National Association for Community Mediation is locally rooted, locally engaged, locally led. So what they do is identify as a credible convener because they are transpartisan. they have the capacity to convene at the local level. And so the early warning hubs that we are forming for each of these sectors to come together is at the local community mediation level. If you remember, they come out of the Civil Rights Act in the United States and are partnered with the federal government's community relations services in order to implement violence prevention and social cohesion activities. So if we were to actually refund those justice centers, as they were called in the 60s, we have a local mechanism for engagement for anyone who wants to participate.
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, for those questions. We've got like 2 minutes left. Does anybody else have a question? You can feel free to.
Yeah, yes, madam.
Okay, hello, please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, madam. Yeah. Good evening, madam. I'm Akhilanda from India. I just want to put a question as far as our country is concerned. Basically, we believe that Lord Krishna is the first mediator of the world, and since the mediation failed, the Mahabharata epic has started. As far as mediation is concerned, the values is more important, and which the values has been eroded, and politicians have been bribed to the voters, and we don't have any democratic or any civic activity as far as the local government is concerned. And moreover, we teach our children values for survival and not values for life. So how do you this context, how this mediation could be an effective to build a local community or to build a local network and to bring a good democracy in the country as far as India is concerned, which is a heterogeneous and a diversity people are living in India.
Absolutely. I take a multi-generational view, begin by teaching our children. I think those are life skills. Conflict resolution should be life skills that is taught from kindergarten, first grade onwards. If we cannot engage constructively, if we cannot think critically, and if we are not teaching our children those skills, we are lost, frankly. I would begin in schools, Ilanji. There are amazing programs around the world that are models for conflict resolution curricula in the schools. What is also interesting is that the biggest growth in mediators is in India. There are tens of thousands of mediators now in India, but largely working in the court system. What is not
Yes.
as prevalent is in the community. And I think it will take the effort of the next generation of mediators. I have lots of conversations with mediators in India who say, we are now very familiar with the structure of much more interpersonal mediation and commercial mediation. We now need to take it to the next generation of community-wide mediation. And I think that's the wave of spreading the discipline and principles of mediation to the next generation.
And
Thank you,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And that we really are complete here, but this reminds me, I've told a story at times about my first grade or maybe about a 6-year-old granddaughter who came home from school telling me that she had been the assistant to the peacemaker in her class that day. And so it starts very young, and that's a wonderful thing. Bruce does have a note in the chat that's very nice about his group. Let's see.
Braver Angels, yep.
braverangels.org. And it's wonderful to have you all here. Prabha, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to get to know you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and information about Mediators Beyond Borders International. A pleasure. We'll see everyone next week, same time, same place, different speaker. Please feel free to let us know of any donation you might make to a food bank, and then we can add it to our total. Thank you so much, all. Take care. Bye-bye.